Once in a while, I get the opportunity to interview someone multiple times because they continue to bring forth new insights and ideas that are really valuable for people. And today is such a day. I'm really pleased to have Faust Ruggerio on the show again today. He is a clinical psychologist. He has just written a number of books. He started on a book called Fix Yourself Handbook, which really goes in and talks about how we can overcome some of these negative emotions in our lives. And then just recently, he's come up with a new book that is focusing on anxiety. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I hope you'll join us. I think you're going to find this a fascinating discussion because he is always so insightful and has such great, great thoughts and applications for us.
At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Hey, folks, thanks for joining us. And Faust, thank you for joining me. And folks, just so you know, I've interviewed Faust at least twice now, and this is the third opportunity. And I just love having you on the show.
Doug, I just, it's great when my publicist came back and said, hey, Dr. Doug wants to do this. I said, okay, because I know it's going to be informative. I know it's going to be fun. So, let's have a good time.
Well, and we really will. So give the audience a little bit of history because, you had the Fix Yourself book and you've developed that, but what's going on here? Because you've just written this new book that's going to come out very soon called Fix Your Anxiety Handbook.
As we were talking before we started, I put the first book out and it took off. And I mean, we were 150 interviews later and, it just kept the momentum just kept on building. So we decided to turn that Fix Yourself into what we call the Fix Yourself Empowerment Series. And right now there are 5 books planned and we'll see where it goes from there. But the second one, I finished writing at the end of March. It's now been edited. The narrator has it for the audio book, and we hope to get it out by the end of summer. And that one's called the Fix Your Anxiety Handbook. And it's designed specifically to help people deal with, this internal nemesis that just tears people apart.
Well, and what encouraged you to do anxiety next?
I just looked at the world. First of all, people were coming back and they were saying, this is what's really affecting everyone. Being a therapist still practicing, I'm seeing it a lot more since the pandemic and everything that went on with that, the shift in the economy and all those kinds of things. People are just not having an easy time with this. And internally they're struggling. They're obsessing on things. They are thinking they're in very dark places. So I just thought, let me give people a roadmap to get them through all of this. The kinds of things you see in a counseling experience, let's get it down on paper. And we use the same design as the Fix Yourself Handbook. So if anyone's read that, will know that we're gonna give those short 5-6 page chapters. We're gonna pack it full of information for them, and then we're gonna get into the exact steps we're gonna use to deal with whatever that chapter talked about. So first book had 36 chapters. This one we have 21, but of course the first book was across the board, all different kinds of things. This is specifically about anxiety. So 21 chapters, and it's exactly the same design, which people love the first time around. So we're gonna keep that flow.
Well, and as I mentioned to you, I've interviewed a few people. And sometimes anxiety becomes one of the topics. But one comment was made that, how do you define anxiety? Because there are so many definitions, it gets so confusing. And so anxiety has become kind of that term that oversees everything else, with a number of different symptoms that go on there. What are your thoughts about that? Why push it that direction rather than saying, well, it is what it is?
I'll tell you what, there's what you just said really points to the notion that we really haven't become proficient at pinpointing what to do. Where does this come from? We're physical body, we're physical entities. Anxiety has its etiology, its beginnings in our bodies. And that's where this thing gets off track. Once it hits, it works its way through the emotions, and then it gets to the intellect, to the brain. Now people think they're crazy. Now people think, I can't control things, and they start looking for what's causing it, and it's always something outside of themselves. Now, after the anxiety hits, you may obsess on things. You may look at things that are bothering you, but you got to go physical first. So what is anxiety? It's a physical condition. It's kind of like a neurological misfiring, if you will, where the body just goes into a neurological spasm, some people call them, but it just gets to the point where internally things are moving so fast and so intensely that the person can't get control of it. The key is always to get control of the physical first. So that's what I tell people. If we're going to start working with anxiety, you got to go body first.
Oh, wow. And, and that is fascinating. And that kind of goes along with what I've understood before, that it starts with a physical response, and then that moves into the emotions. And then the brain interprets that emotion based on potentially subconscious information.
It could be. Everyone's different. It depends on what's happening with that person. Again, starting physical. And it's interesting. This is where it gets confusing. Maybe the trigger is, I heard a song that reminded me of some tragedy, and now I think about that and I go into anxiety. And so the trigger may be intellectual, it may be emotional, but the development, the way it pushes through the human being starts in the body, that anxious. And because you think about it, if it didn't go physical, you could say, well, I heard that song and it made me think of that horrible thing that happened, but I have that in perspective. Maybe it makes me sad. I'm not liking that. And maybe in a short period of time, I should be okay. But for some folks, when they hear that trigger, then the body engages. And the problem is they can't shut it off. It keeps on spinning, so to speak.
And that body, which engages in a way that, if I'm understanding it, can create all sorts of emotional responses of tears, anxiety, tears, fear, anger, all of those types of things coming up. And it's the body. I mean, I know sometimes, for instance, if someone scares me, the first response is that body response. Absolutely. And then depending on what's going on, it goes from there. So talk a little bit now about the book, as far as what's really, as you put it, the demon inside of you. What's that driving force behind the pain that people experience? And again, we're going to go into some of the different modalities or the different ways in which people experience anxiety. But let's talk about first, what's the driving force behind that?
I call it the demon inside. And what I wanted to do was to help people stop working against themselves, where they say, so to speak, I am anxiety. Now I've become this person and I can't separate the anxiety from who I am. So I wanted the initial flow of the book to separate that. So I called it the anxiety demon. And I said, okay, let's look at that as some entity inside you, so to speak, nothing metaphysical, just something that we can split it up so you can see, okay, this is not me, it's something that I have. It's just like what we help with when people have cancer. We'll say, you're not cancer. This is not your whole identity now. It's something you have. And when people can embrace that concept, their ability to engage in activities and treatment modalities that will help them are enhanced, because they have something to fight against, which is not themselves. So that's the trick, so to speak, in the book. I just said, okay, this is not you. You are not anxiety. You are a person who has anxiety. So I keep referring to in the book as the beast, the demon inside you, that monster. And what I'm getting back from the test subjects that when we did the research phase, is that they loved it, because they were saying, and most of them had anxiety. They were saying, you know what? I don't feel like I'm fighting myself anymore. I don't feel crazy. I have something to direct my energy toward, to eliminate. So I started with that. That's the key to this. It's a condition you have, not who you are.
Okay.
And the
And you know
mind
what?
makes you believe that.
Yeah, and you bring up a really important point. I know that I've been working a little bit with behavior analyses, so personality profiling and all of that
Right.
type of thing. And one of the objections that I hear, not often, but occasionally, is I don't want to be labeled. I don't want to do this because I don't want to be labeled. And it's like, well, it's not going to label you, because at least the one I'm using, you can change it. And this is just a means of kind of looking at it. So you're saying the same thing, where people, and because I'm not around a lot of people that experience anxiety to a heavy degree, it's a label, isn't it? People get labeled and therefore they think that's who they are.
And it's interesting you bring that up, because I have the younger therapists that are doing what I do for a living are coming in and they're asking patients, what's your label? And people are labeling themselves, whether it has to do with their sexuality or all that kind of stuff. They're labeling themselves. And it's a dangerous thing to get into, because you and I have been around a while, know that we flow through cycles of life, and that's not who we are. That may be what we're experiencing at the time. And we're gonna evolve as a person. We're gonna develop the way we live. So I tell people the same thing. Try to stay away from a label. When your brain gets to this and you get stuck and you're in that anxiety prison, if you will, you think that that's who you are. This is, and it's Groundhog Day. It's the hamster on the wheel. You get up every day and the anxiety clicks. For a lot of people, it starts right when the moment they get out of bed, the anxiety clicks, and they say, well, this is who I am every day. This is what's going to happen to me. And even in those folks, when it gets intense, there's a way out of it. It's not a life sentence. You may have anxiety the rest of your life, but not the way you have it now. It will be something you'll feel, you'll define, and you'll know what to do with it, because they get stuck.
And I think part of the challenge, and I see in your book that you've listed a number of different symptoms of anxiety. Could you go over some of those so that we can begin to understand why the word anxiety has started to cover such a wide variety of symptoms?
Well, and that's the thing. Anxiety, the clever thing, if you will, about this little demon is that it knows how to attach to everything. That's the problem. So it doesn't matter what you're doing. You'll find all the symptomology. It's physical. You're going to find, for some people, the headaches, the sweats, the shakes. It causes sleep disorders. It causes concentration and focus problems. Some people firmly believe their personality changes, that they are now angry people who are reactive all the time. The bottom line is anything that can begin in the body and move its way through your emotions and your intellect with that much force is going to attach itself to everything. And it does. So people come in with all different kinds of symptoms, and in some way, they're either related to directly related to the anxiety, or the anxiety exacerbates them. So now we're it's chicken or egg there. We still go right back to the beginning. That's why physicians will prescribe anti-anxiety medications for anxiety when it gets out of hand and people are having panic attacks, because it's got to go body first. You're not going to think yourself out of this.
Okay, so when you talk about the body to mind or mind to body paradigm, what are you talking about there?
I am talking about just that. As a physician, there's a direct relationship between what we call the body and the mind. The mind is in fact the physical organ, so it's all the body. But since the mind can think like it does, we tend to separate these things. If you start something physical like anxiety, it will run its course and get to the mind and affect the way your mind works. Conversely, if you start thinking about it and it gets worse, now it goes right back and makes the anxiety worse. So you have this reciprocal kind of a relationship that's doing nothing but intensifying the anxiety. But the neat thing about that is, since we have that relationship, that mind-body relationship, we can use it to get healthy, to think healthy thoughts, to do things for our body that that calm the anxiety down, and and that's what I do with people. I train them how to use their mind and their body and their emotions in a healthy way, so that they stop this whole I call it, they stop themselves from feeding the demon, if you will, from doing things that are actually going to make things worse.
Well, and you made a comment that anxiety may last forever and ever, but it may not be that intense. So when we get into neuroscience, is there an applicable part of neuroscience and the neurons and how we think that we may be able to change? Does that have an effect on how we can literally overcome that anxiety and actually be much healthier in our body, in our mind, in our lives?
No, yes, it does. What we see is that the neurology actually changes over time. It will on its own, but however, depending on how we are living, that defines how that neurology changes. So if we give into anxiety and we live it every day and we firmly believe that's what's going on, I always take the people back to habit formation and things like that. The way the brain is formulated is to adjust to what we do. So if we're the smoker, the body tries to adjust, the brain tries to adjust. Drinking, or we go into healthy things, working out, or whatever it may be, the brain is going to try to adjust. It's that whole homeostasis thing. It's going to try to get a balance, bring us to a balance regarding whatever we do. But if we continue to feed it with negativity, and we keep on experiencing the anxiety and letting it tear us down, the brain will adapt to that. Not only will it deal with it every day, there are times it will start the process because that's what it knows how to do. We taught it that, and learning is nothing more than repetition over time. That's all it is. So the brain learns. That's the organ in our body that's designed to learn and then adapt. And we're telling it to do some things that are going to hurt us. That's the problem.
So as we think about whatever response we have physically and mentally to whatever is causing what we call anxiety, what is it that causes a person in the middle of the night to wake up and just be frightened and in tears and everything else because they're anticipating something's going to happen in the next few days? Maybe they're under pressure for something. What is it that initiates that feeling that they just wake up with?
Well, there are a couple of answers for that. For some people, they are people whose minds, they say, my mind doesn't turn off. So they have to really work to get to sleep to begin with. But then they'll do some things that will, and this is where the mistake occurs. They want to get to sleep. So maybe it's have a few drinks, or it's take a few of the medications or something, CBD oils, whatever. But they tend to get you to sleep. But the interesting thing about anxiety is, as you relax, anxiety will build because it's energy, and the mind has not learned how to begin to shut that down. The body hasn't learned how to relax enough. So it's, now I sit down for 10 or for an hour or two, and then I get a panic attack, or I go to sleep at night and I get a panic attack because the body is actually gaining energy and we don't know what to do with it. And I'll have people come up and say, I wake up in the middle of the night, nothing is on my mind, and I'm in a panic attack. And I woke up, or I'm sitting and I'm watching television and I'm relaxed as can be, and there comes the panic attack. The body has been worn down enough so it doesn't have enough resources to fight the anxiety. The brain is expecting it. Nothing's really fighting this because people don't know how to. That's what I teach them. This is how we're going to start doing this.
Well, and I pictured in my mind, you're going to laugh at this. I picture in my mind as you were describing things, here's this little rotating ball with just flashes going out and out and out. And all of a sudden it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. What would you say, what percentage actually experience anxiety in their lives to the degree that it affects them overall?
The average is now they're talking about around 30%, 32%.
Really?
Anyway, it's high. It's 3 out of 10. Some, I've seen it go, people say as high as 4 out of 10, but you don't know what the researchers are discussing in terms of anxiety? Are they talking about your basic anxiety where people are just, anxious, a little bit anxious every day, but they can function through it? Or are they talking about it gets to full-blown panic attacks? Panic attacks, basically 10% of the population is what I've seen over the years. But I'm seeing more of it. That's the concern. I'm seeing more anxiety. And that's not even the biggest concern. The biggest concern is that people are surrendering to it. That's why I wrote the book, because people are giving up. People
Okay.
are using artificial means to try to figure it out. They're getting desperate. I have a whole chapter on desperation, because they're getting desperate and they're trying anything they can to get through this. That's the more concerning part of it.
Well, and so do we all have in our DNA that anxiety ball sitting there? And then some people just allow it to affect them and some don't? Or is it something that some people somehow either inherit through DNA or develop in childhood because of whatever their perception is of their upbringing or whatever that happens to be?
I've always said it's DNA related, that it's something that is inherited. And the reason I say that, it's not just a guess. I'll go back and do the social histories and go back and get the family history. And what I find with depression and anxiety, rarely ever do I find someone come in and they can't go back and tell me who in the family had it. And usually it's within a generation. Mom and dad had it. I got a brother or a sister or an uncle and aunt. Many will come in. Probably, if I get to anxiety, depression people, probably 25% will have had a suicide in the family in at least a generation or two back. I'll find a lot of panic attacks in people who are experiencing them. So I've always said, yeah, there's probably some genetic predisposition involved. And then your environment is the next thing. Who was reacting in what way as you were growing up? You may have a parent who had pretty reasonable anxiety, but really took their time and lived a slower life and learned how to do some things to help deal with it without even thinking about it. They weren't even thinking they have anxiety. They just had a lifestyle that didn't support the flow of the anxiety. So, it's always that interaction between your genetics and your environment. But I see a lot of genetics when it comes to anxiety.
I tell a story when I had my dental practice where I used to treat people who had chronic head and neck pain. And I may have mentioned this to you in one of our other interviews, but they come into the office and they look at them and they say, I have TMJ. And I kind of smile and I look at them and I go, okay, actually, that's not true. You have two, one on this side and one on that side. Now, what are your symptoms? Well, I'm having headaches or this is happening or that. Okay, now let's go to the actual causation of those symptoms and treat those, because I guarantee you only 1% actually has a problem with their TMJ, the joint, And so I guess for me, the question is, as you start to work with these people and treat them, do you go to the root cause, or are you just trying to help them manage and overcome it in a way peripherally? Or are you able actually to get into the root cause and say, okay, here's the root cause, let's get rid of that?
Twofold answer. The first thing I do is to work with the symptoms, because I need to get them comfortable first.
Right.
And then in a frame of mind that allows them to go back and work with causation. Sometimes, and I think it's a mistake some therapists make, they go back and they try to get the cause before the person is able to understand that and assimilate all the information. So I get them to a point where they're not going to be reactive to information. If the information is, they buried something like maybe an abuse early in life, I don't want them reactive while I'm going back to get that, because I know it's going to intensify the anxiety. So I'm going to get the symptoms in check enough before I go back. And I can usually get their symptoms reduced in the first month of counseling. I can usually get them down to a point where now we can start going back. And it's interesting, once I get them down to that point, they'll bring up some of the causes themselves. Either they just realized them or they didn't want to go get them when they were anxious, because as soon as they did, they were, that are horrified, panic attacks, what have you. So it's always, again, what are we doing? We're calming the body down, getting the emotions just pushed to the side a little bit so we can start to deal with some things, and then getting their brain to be able to, we're preparing that brain to be able to deal with some of the causes.
And have you found that there is a generalized cause? I mean, is there a commonality of causes as you're working with people that you've discovered, or are they just all over the board?
It's all over. I mean, you can kind of get it down to a few things, like, the typical things that cause people their anxiety, their relationships and finances and health issues and things like that. But I'll tell you, if I had to pick something, and it's kind of out of the box, because we all have these things, it's back to doing the wrong things, taking this drug, or I went on Dr. Google and found that, well, you know what, this guy's trying this and then he did it, or I'm drinking, or I'm doing these things that are in fact treating the symptoms, but I'm doing them in such a sporadic way. It's just, there's no foundation under what I'm doing. So I tried. The other thing is, when they don't work real well, a month or so, they stop them and they try something new. Now they develop this pattern in their brain that nothing works and I'm doomed. Where all it is learning how to slow things down enough so we can start the process. And once I get them in, once I get to the end of the first session, they look at me and they look at me as almost untrusting and say, it's going to be that easy? I said, well, it's not going to be easy, but what I just presented you was the first couple steps of the roadmap, which we weren't even looking at.
So it's a matter of really helping them to understand. I guess one of my questions is, how much is our physical activity? How much is our environment? How much are with the people that we hang around with? How much of these external influences can either affect us in a positive way or a negative way when it comes to anxiety? Or is that even relevant?
Oh, you're right on the mark. And it's chapter information in the book. Anxiety, we tend to be either anxious people, maybe, and I'm simplifying here, but anxious people or not so anxious people. Now, the anxious people, for them, environmental things are going to just trip the switch. Example, the pandemic. Example, the way the politics is running, and shock news and all those kinds. And they feed into these things, and anxiety often causes obsessions. And then they get obsessed with certain things. The company they keep, if the company they keep are negative people, and they're attacking, and they put people down, that's going to have an impact. And the way they live their life, if they have just too much going on, they're working 6 days a week, they have 3 kids, this has to be handled at home. The relationship isn't good. That's gonna do all those things. So that's that reciprocal nature I talk about. Genetics are there. I'm anxious, but I got all these other things going on that feeds it. And then I'm not doing the right things. Well, I'll bring that into the picture too. And before you know it, we got this full blown picture with a person who can't rationally think their way through it anymore.
There are so many people, whether it's politics or religion or whatever, that have all of these, that have really gotten into these conspiracy theories. Yes. And I've chatted with a number of them, and some of them I've actually had to finally say enough is enough, because I just don't get what you're trying to say here. For people who are really into that, is that a symptom of anxiety, or does that cause do the conspiracy theories cause anxiety, or is it a symptomology that they already have some type of anxiety and therefore they're able to buy into those conspiracy theories so quickly?
You'll find that the people buying into those theories are also people that have a tendency to be attracted to drama, or when the drama begins, they can't pull themselves out of it. So once it hits, it connects, and then it kind of connects with that anxiety, with that whole neurology we're talking about, and they can't find a way to stop it. That's the problem. There's no pause pedal, if you will, no brake on this thing. And then they just keep on going, and then it runs its course until they eventually hit the panic attacks, or do something desperate, or somehow get to the point where they can hurt themselves, or they get to someone like myself to help them.
So as you talk about the new book, all right, you Fix Your Anxiety Handbook. When I think of the word handbook, I'm thinking, okay, this is going to be a step by step of how I overcome anxiety. Is this a self-help type of situation, or is it a foundation of awareness and understanding, which I know, unless someone is actually willing to be aware and then take the courage to do something about it, nothing's ever going to happen. Is this one thing where it helps them to become aware and then they really do need to reach out and get professional help? Or is it something that they could look at, and if they have the emotional intelligence high enough to do that, be able to work right from your book and overcome many of those situations?
To answer that, it is presented to begin with as a book that has all the information they need. I want them to become intellectual anxiety experts, that so to speak. I want that finally say, here, it's all in one place. This is what anxiety is all about. Then it is a step-by-step procedure, just like every book I write. I'm an action guy, so to speak. If I'm going to give you information and then say, well, you have it all now, see ya. Well, we know I didn't tell you what to do with it. It's like I gave you 1,000-piece erector set and I took the instructions home. And I said, well, here, I'll be back tomorrow. Build me a house. We know what that's going to look like if you even start it. So the instructions are always there. Now, with some people, they're going to look at that and say, yeah, I can do a lot of this, but now I'm getting stuck on this one. And I always have that in my action steps. This one, you may need to call a counselor for. If abuse or something was in your childhood or whatever, and you're stuck. The fact that you're stuck means you need help. You might get that from family or a close friend that you trust, or there's no shame in calling a counselor and saying, I'm doing pretty well, but I'm stuck on this. And maybe you can just help me through this part of it.
So for the audience that's listening and feeling anxious about the anxiety, what are some of those steps that you share in the book that really are basic steps to help someone to move it into a much better mental, emotional condition for themselves?
We've already begun to discuss it. First, do not think of this as who you are. That's the first thing. The second thing is we've got to slow your body down. And I give them ways to do that, whether it's breathing exercises or meditation and yoga, or I give them some nutritional things. I give them some step-by-step things to slow down. So that's important. We're going to slow the body down. As far back as the first book, when I talked about emotions, I said, we want to get you to stop reacting emotionally. And that's hard when you have anxiety. But just keep that in mind, that you don't want your emotions to override your brain. Big key in this. And people who have anxiety tend to feel they are alone. Nobody understands me. No one understands what I'm feeling. When I have an outburst, they just get mad and say, would you please straighten out? And they give them all those kinds of things. So what I get a lot is, finally, someone's got this, and I don't feel like I'm all alone in this. So by all means, have your support system. That's huge, to be able to have that support system. If you're and that's at the starting block. People will say, well, give me all the steps. No, all I want you to do when you come is, let's slow down a little bit. Let's get the information so you understand it. And then we'll start talking about things. In the book, I go to I think it's the first 9 chapters are nothing but let's understand it. And people might be saying at that point, and I tell them in the introduction, the first 9 chapters, you're just I want you to understand anxiety. Then you're going to see chapter by chapter. I'm going to say, take this piece and that piece. Now do this, and you're going to be able to come through it. But it's not something you're going to do all at one time.
And so once you get that awareness, you start to slow down a little bit. Then what are some of the other steps that we can consciously take and be aware of that are going to help with that?
First one I go to is internal language. And I've been hinting about that all the way through the interview. We have a tendency to say, this is who I am. Then, of course, it's, I can't do this. Who would want me like this? I'm a failure. And we really start tearing ourselves down to the point that any resources we might have had, we pretty much told ourselves we don't have. So it's about internal positive language. And I'm not saying go say you're wonderful. I'm just saying I'm a good person. I have this condition. And I say that in one chapter. I'm a good person. I just have anxiety, and there's a way to beat this. And that way you talk to yourself it just sets the stage for everything you're going to do. If you get up in the morning and say, I'm a rotten, horrible person, I know what my day is going to be like. Well, self-fulfilling prophecy's just been stated. On the other hand, if you say, you know what, I have anxiety, but I'm good. I'm going to really try I'm going to step by step try to do what I have to do to make this happen. That sets the stage for something completely different.
So affirmations.
Yes.
When we talk about self-talk, it's one thing in our minds when I do something, I'm so stupid, type of thing, versus being able to get up in the morning, look in the mirror, and verbally say some affirmations that I want to be able to achieve. What are your thoughts on the effectiveness and the value of that?
Doug, in every chapter that I write, you've read the books, and everything at the end of every chapter, the last thing I do before I go to the next section is give what I call a declaration, which is an affirmation.
An affirmation.
It's my life. I'm going to live it this way, or I'm not going to let the demon get to me. I can make decisions on my own, whatever it may be. I put those affirmations at the end of every chapter for a reason. And those relate directly to the chapter. So if we're dealing with a chapter about negative people in my life, I may put, I don't remember the exact quote, but it might be, I am the guardian of my own life and I decide who gets in, and the chapter may have been one that said, we have to watch people, places, and things, and how we're letting those things into our life, because they're going to have an effect on us. Even if we're healthy, they'll have an effect on us, so, but with something as potentially debilitating as anxiety, we don't want that. So the declaration at the end of the chapter is going to be just that. It empowers you. It's a statement of empowerment.
So I'm curious about affirmations, and I know as I've talked and looked at this fairly carefully, there are people that do affirmations that are absolutely unbelievable, and quite frankly, their brain probably never really accepts that affirmation. But when they do affirmations correctly, when the words that they use become believable for them, and believable probably is the key word, is it your experience, or is there any research that is showing that neurologically that's changing the neurological pathways, and literally we're able to, in a number of months or however long that happens to take, that we literally can revamp those neural pathways and minimize those that are communicating the anxiety, and therefore are now communicating that new message that we've been using, as you call it, in your declarations?
I don't know there's any research specifically on the subject, but I do know that the reason so many people will take those and just discard them is because they can't attach them to something. If you're going to do a declaration or an affirmation, then it should follow information that helps people reorganize the way they're thinking, like what I'm setting forth in these chapters. You're having problems with slowing your body down. Okay, we're going to teach you that first. At the end of the chapter, there may be an affirmation that says, I will slow down so I can think positively. So it's one to connect to information. The reason I put them in there is because if they can say those, it automatically reminds them of the text. I relate it right back to the text, so it becomes functional, it becomes actionable. So it's in and of themselves, affirmations do really nothing. They're words. Confucius say, but you've got to connect it to something. And a lot of times when I've heard people who also have written books, they'll say, well, I'm assuming the person will connect it back to their life. And I say, but you don't know their life. So how in the world can you make that statement? That you're making a generalization. However, when you present solid information that you want them to act on. And that declaration also follows my action steps. So information, action steps, summary. Now there's a little declaration.
The declaration. So it's really kind of that building block that you're talking about.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Where that becomes it. And you find that, I always look at some of this stuff as being what I call habits. And I don't mean to use that in a word that puts things down of what you're talking about, but we habitually start to think the way that we think. We habitually allow that anxiety to occur. We habitually do all of these things. And I've heard different people talk about how in order to change a habit, it takes 90 days of conscious awareness, action steps, and I would assume also declarations, to the point where after 90 days, you actually are starting to believe it, you're starting to live it, you're starting to experience it. Has that been your experience with this?
Yes, absolutely. That's the food for the brain that we need. And that's what a lot of people will once they start working with the program, they start to realize that happen. It's interesting. We talk about habituation and habit formation and all those habits. Sometimes you watch something or you see something that is completely out of the realm of what you're doing, and it connects back and all the light bulbs go on. So I'm 2 years ago, I just put the first book out, and I was relaxing a bit, and this safari kind of show came on the internet, and they go out every day and they do a 3-hour kind of safari. Guides explain things. And what caught me was the elephants, the lions, the cheetahs walk right in front of them, right in front of the Jeep, and never bother them as long as the person stays in the Jeep. And one of the women was a zoologist. Says the reason for this is their brains are trained from the beginning that they don't react to us. We step off the Jeep, we're food. But if we stay on, it's habituated in their brain that they're not going to attack. And I said to myself, interesting, I'm teaching all these change the habit kind of things. Just what you said, 90 days, it's consistency over time. And if we are willing to do that, the brain will adjust. We have, primitive animals whose brains adjust not to attack people. I've seen them walk on top of the Jeep to get past it, and they don't even look at the people. The brain is that powerful. So if we continue to do what we need to do to change habits, the brain adjusts. And that's also part of what I'm teaching.
Okay, so let's talk about this concept. As I've interviewed different people, particularly some who have gone through very, very difficult relationships and codependent relationships and abuse and all of that, and they stay in those relationships. And one of the reasons is the fear of, if they get out of that relationship, it's an unknown world, and the fear of the unknown is larger and greater than the fear of what they're experiencing. So when people start to work through this anxiety, I know one of the chapters in your book talks about welcome to the new world. And do you find that there is kind of a situation that occurs where people suddenly are overcoming the anxiety, overcoming those fears, overcoming those belief systems and so forth, and all of a sudden that fear arises of, what's this new world going to be all about?
Absolutely. I call it the demon's comfort zone. What it does is it puts us in a position to try nothing. I don't want to do this. I'm going to fail. Or it's going to trigger more anxiety. So I keep myself comfortable, I think, in this prison. And it relates right back to what you said about the person who was abused. The brain adjusts. I don't know what life will be there. I don't know if that next guy or next person is going to like me. I know exactly how to live in this hell. And my brain is adjusted to it. I know what to do. I can survive it. And I keep on going. And that's sometimes part of the reason why people stay in anxious, anxiety-provoking situations, because their brain knows what to do there. They'll say they're horrible. They'll stay home. They won't go out much. They won't go to parties. Very rarely do people come in to see them, because it's a lot easier to do that. But they'll tell you they're miserable there. They create a little comfort prison. They stay there. And again, I'm teaching them how to take one step at a time. I liken it to the little bird leaving the nest. If it doesn't leave the nest, some predator is going to come and get it. It has to learn to fly. And that's what I'm teaching them. I do a whole 2 chapters on this.
So it really takes some confidence, some courage to move forward in these situations. And I suppose it just takes enough is enough experiences to say, all right, I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah, and I tell people it's one step at a time. I call it creating little rooms in the big world. If you step out of your comfort zone, that world looks huge. And now what do I do in this? And I liken it to setting up a factory. And when they set the box up, so to speak, it's just barren. You can't go in there and set your business up. You've got to create little rooms, offices that do little things, so to speak. Same thing in life. We're going to move forward. We're going to create one step at a time. Conquer this one step. As you do that, 2 things happen. One is you conquer the step, but 2, you convince yourself that you're capable of doing it.
And you get me laughing because as you were talking about that, when I work with clients, one of the first things I tell them is, I want you to watch a movie. What about Bob? And I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but this concept of baby steps is so important.
Oh my God, yes.
It just, go a little bit at a time. Don't try to jump over that arch all at once.
And you can see where that attaches to going slow and using your intellect just to kind of, we try to use our intellect to do a million things. I mean, I teach this for a living, but if I get a day where I have 10 things going, I will actually just say to myself, okay, stop, pick the ones you're going to do, get to those others later on. And quickly my day becomes organized because I didn't try to, grab the world all in one breath. It's just one little step at a time. And as long as your steps are consistent, you get to your destination.
You get where you're going. Well, we're going to have another interview here because our time's out. As usual, it's like, holy
it goes
cow,
quickly, doesn't
it? It really goes quickly. So what would be, number one, the message you'd like to share with the audience? And number 2, and maybe reverse that, how are they going to find the book so that they can actually start to get this? And when's it actually coming out?
Right. Okay. The first thing I would tell people is, you've spun your wheels. You've tried to do this whole thing and it hasn't worked. That should tell you that you need to do something different. Don't do this alone, and be willing to take those little baby steps, but get someone to help you. When people read the book, they come back and again, the test subjects now are saying, this was great. All of a sudden, I didn't feel alone. That was the key. And I also write everything I do as a journey. So, you start from the beginning when you're conflicted and confused. You get to the end and you're saying, okay, there's hope here. That's what I want to get people. Understand that this is a beatable condition. Understand it. It's not who you are. It's something you have. It's beatable, and we can help you do that. As far as, me, it's the same thing as it's always been. My website, FaustRuggerio.com. The new book we're expecting it to be out by the end of the summer. Within the next few months, we're looking to get a release date on that. All the basic drudgery stuff is done. It's being narrated now for an audio book.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it'll be on Audible.
Yeah. So as soon as I'm hearing within the next 2 or 3 weeks, we could see it out on Audible, as long as Amazon says we can put it there before we have a hard copy done, and then some people do. And if we can do that, then it'll be out on audiobook on Audible. And then by the end of the summer, end of August or so, we're hoping to see it, listed on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and all those usual places.
Fantastic. Well, Faust, once again, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure to be able to visit with you again.
And same here. I always look forward to, it's nice to, you know how it is. You do some of the interviews and you're kind of watching your you're okay. Are we done yet? And then I just had the same thing when you said we're done. I said, geez, already?
I know.
we may have to do a series, Doug.
Well, and it sounds like we are going to, because you've got a series of books you're going to write.
There you go.
You'll have to help me figure out how you get those written. But anyway, folks, hey, thanks for listening today. And Faust, thanks again for being on the show, and really appreciate your insights and your efforts to really help people the way that you do. I think it's just amazing.
Thanks. Like it's always a pleasure to be with you.
All right, folks, thanks for listening. We hope you'll join us again, and have a wonderful week.